The minor prophets were messengers chosen by God to speak to his people during critical moments in the history of Israel and Judah. Despite being called minor, they were not less important. That title only refers to the shorter length of their books compared to the major prophets. Imagine living a love story that mirrors the relationship between God and his people, filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and forgiveness. That was the life of Hosea. He lived in the northern kingdom of Israel around the 8th century BC, a turbulent era marked by political turmoil and widespread idolatry. The people had turned away from God and were worshiping other gods, especially Baal, who was quite popular among neighboring nations. So to deliver his message in a vivid and unforgettable way, God asked Hosea to do something shocking: to marry an unfaithful woman. Her name was Gomer. And just as expected, Gomer was unfaithful to the prophet, abandoning him multiple times. But that was the point. Hosea's marriage was a living illustration of how God felt. Just as Gomer betrayed Hosea, the people of Israel were betraying God. And yet, Hosea kept loving Gomer. Just as God continued loving Israel despite all its unfaithfulness. Even in the face of sin, the core message was clear. God doesn't give up on those he loves. As he says, "I drew them with cords of a man, with bands of love." Joel came on the scene during a time when a swarm of locusts devastated the land of Israel. Imagine waking up to pick fresh fruit only to find dry branches and dust blowing in the wind. That's about how it was. Joel saw the destruction and realized something important. God was calling his people to wake up. The locust plague wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a divine warning, urging repentance. Joel was also the first prophet to speak clearly about what would later be called the Day of the Lord, a future time of judgment, but also of restoration for those who sought after God. Joel delivered one of the most beautiful promises in the Bible. He prophesied that one day God would pour out his Spirit on all people, men, women, young and old. Everyone would be filled with the Spirit of God. This incredible moment was fulfilled centuries later on the day of Pentecost, as recorded in Acts 2. Joel is sharp and intense. His book is short, only 3 chapters, but it's packed with meaning. He teaches us that even when everything seems destroyed, God can restore, renew, and breathe life into what was dead. The book of Obadiah is the shortest in the Old Testament, just 21 verses. But as the saying goes, good things come in small packages. And Obadiah's message is powerful. We know little about Obadiah's personal life. There are no details like son of so-and-so or resident of such a city. What matters to him is God's message, and that message was directed specifically at one of Israel's neighboring nations, Edom. The Edomites were descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, the patriarch of Israel. In other words, Israel and Edom were blood relatives, yet lived as longtime rivals. When Jerusalem was attacked, Edom didn't just stand by and watch. They celebrated and even helped the enemies. Obadiah delivered a harsh warning: "The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee." Those who saw themselves as untouchable, living high in the Rocky Mountains, would be brought down. Their arrogance, betrayal, and violence would be judged by God. "Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord." But there is also hope. The end of the prophecy speaks of Israel's restoration. The day of the Lord would be a day of justice for Edom, but of deliverance for God's people. Jonah may be the most stubborn prophet in the Bible. It all began when God gave Jonah a clear command: "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it." Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, a powerful and brutal nation, and a sworn enemy of Israel. For Jonah, going there was like asking to be hated, mocked, or even killed. So what did Jonah do? He ran. He bought a ticket on a ship bound for Tarshish, literally in the opposite direction of where God had sent him. During the journey, a violent storm broke out. The ship nearly sank, and the terrified sailors cast lots to find out who was responsible. The lot fell on Jonah, so he admitted, "Take me up and cast me forth into the sea. So shall the sea be calm unto you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you." The sailors threw Jonah into the sea. And here comes the most famous part of the story. God prepared a great fish, it doesn't say it was a whale, to swallow Jonah. And he spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish. Inside the fish, Jonah prayed, repented, and at the right time, the fish vomited him onto the shore. God spoke again. "Arise, go unto Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee." This time Jonah had learned his lesson and obeyed. He preached a short and direct message. "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown." To Jonah's surprise, the people of Nineveh believed. From the king down to the least of the citizens, everyone repented with fasting and prayer, and God, seeing their genuine change of heart, chose not to destroy the city. Jonah should have been happy, right? But instead he was angry. He had hoped to see fire from heaven fall on his enemies, not mercy. The story ends with God teaching Jonah and all of us that compassion and forgiveness are greater than revenge. Micah lived around the same time as Isaiah, during the 8th century BC, and witnessed firsthand the growing social injustices in Israel and Judah. While a few grew richer and richer, the poor were mercilessly exploited. Coming from a small town called Moresheth Gath in the countryside of Judah, Micah was deeply familiar with the struggles of ordinary people, not just life in the capital. That gave him a very human perspective on the pain of the forgotten. So he boldly denounced corrupt rulers, self-serving religious leaders, and a society that treated injustice as if it were perfectly normal. But Micah wasn't just a critic. He also proclaimed hope. He prophesied that, despite the coming judgment, God would still raise up a special king. "But thou, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel." This directly connects the story of Jesus to God's plan revealed through the prophets. Now, remember the city of Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, where Jonah had once been sent? Well, about 150 years after Jonah's preaching, the people of Nineveh had indeed repented. But over time, they returned to their old wicked ways, perhaps even worse than before. That's why Nahum announced that the Assyrian Empire, known for its brutality and seemingly invincible armies, would be brought down. Nineveh, the mighty capital that Jonah had once helped save, would now be destroyed for good. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. Nahum describes God's judgment like an unstoppable storm. Nothing could stand in the way of divine justice. And just as he prophesied, Nineveh truly fell. In 612 BC, the city was conquered by a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, and it never rose again as a major power. Have you ever looked at the world, seen so much injustice, and asked, "God, why do you allow this?" If so, you'll deeply relate to Habakkuk. Unlike most prophets who received a message to deliver to the people, Habakkuk did the opposite. He started by talking directly to God, questioning everything he saw around him. "O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear?" He saw violence, corruption, conflict, and it felt like God was silent. God's answer: he was indeed at work, but in a surprising way. He was raising up the Babylonians, a nation even more ruthless, to bring judgment upon Judah. Imagine how shocked Habakkuk must have felt upon hearing that God would use an even more wicked people to punish Israel's sin. Habakkuk wasn't satisfied at first. He climbed up to a watchtower and said he would wait to see what else God had to say. And God answered again, bringing a beautiful vision. "The just shall live by his faith." That phrase is so powerful, it's quoted multiple times in the New Testament. In other words, the faithful would be preserved, but the proud would be brought down. Moreover, the Babylonians themselves would also be punished for their many sins. The end of the story? Habakkuk didn't receive all the answers he wanted, but he learned an even greater lesson. Even when we don't understand God's ways, we can still trust him. The book ends with a beautiful prayer in which Habakkuk declares, "Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be on the vines, yet I will rejoice in the Lord." In other words, even if everything around him falls apart, he chose to trust God with all his heart, just as we must do today. Zephaniah begins his book by laying out his full lineage, introducing himself as the great-great-grandson of King Hezekiah, which suggests he had royal blood. But despite coming from a noble line, Zephaniah didn't use that as an excuse to live comfortably. On the contrary, he had an urgent message for Judah. He prophesied during the reign of King Josiah, the boy king who tried to bring spiritual reform to the nation. So while Josiah worked to steer the people back on track, Zephaniah echoed God's warning. It was time to take faith seriously, not just go through the motions. Judah was mixing the worship of God with pagan practices. There was idolatry in the temples, injustice in the palaces, and corruption in the streets. So Zephaniah proclaimed what became known as the Great Day of the Lord, a day of judgment and sweeping purification. The great day of the Lord is near. It is near and hasteth greatly, even the voice of the day of the Lord. The mighty man shall cry there bitterly. But don't worry, Zephaniah didn't only bring gloom. He also spoke of hope. God would purify the people, and those who were humble and sought righteousness would be preserved. Now imagine a people who had returned home after years in exile, full of dreams, but over time, their enthusiasm faded. That was the scene when Haggai stepped in. The people of Judah had come back from Babylon, and their first mission was clear: rebuild the temple of God in Jerusalem. But with financial difficulties, enemy opposition, and general discouragement, they gradually abandoned the work. Meanwhile, they focused on their own homes, businesses, and crops. So God raised up Haggai to give the people a spiritual wake-up call. His messages were straightforward and practical. No sugarcoating. Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? In other words, you're living comfortably, but God's house is in ruins. Interestingly, unlike other times when prophets were ignored, this time the people listened. They were stirred, rolled up their sleeves, and began working on the reconstruction of the temple. Zechariah was a contemporary of Haggai, meaning he also lived during the time when the people were rebuilding Jerusalem and the temple after the Babylonian exile. While Haggai was practical and direct, let's build, Zechariah came with a more visionary style. The people were discouraged. The city looked weak, the temple was far from its former glory, and external threats still loomed. So God gave Zechariah a series of visions to encourage and guide the people. Some of the most well-known visions included riders on horses of different colors patrolling the earth, a golden lampstand being continuously supplied with oil by olive trees, a flying scroll, yes, really, and a man measuring Jerusalem to show that it would one day be full of life again. Each vision came with a message. God was in control, watching over his people, and great things were yet to come. Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. That was an essential lesson. The rebuilding and glorious future of Jerusalem wouldn't be achieved by human strength, but by God's power. And more than that, Zechariah pointed forward to the coming of the Messiah. He brought powerful prophecies about a humble and righteous king who would bring salvation, details that were fulfilled in the life of Jesus. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just, and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass. This was fulfilled exactly in Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. That's why Zechariah is one of the most quoted Old Testament books in the New Testament, especially in reference to Jesus. Now imagine being the last prophet to speak before a 400-year silence. That was Malachi's mission, the final prophet of the Old Testament. He lived after the temple had already been rebuilt. The people of Judah had returned from exile, life was starting to settle, but not everything was going well. The initial enthusiasm had cooled off, and people began to grow careless in their devotion to God. The priests were offering sick and blemished animals as sacrifices, as if anything was good enough for God. People were dishonoring marriage and being unfaithful. The nation was withholding tithes and complaining that God wasn't acting fast enough. Through Malachi, God called the people back to sincere faith, not a lukewarm, sloppy version of it. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. In other words, God remained faithful, even when the people stumbled. And there was also an amazing promise. Malachi announced that before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, God would send a messenger to prepare the way. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. This prophecy was fulfilled centuries later through John the Baptist, who prepared the way for Jesus' coming. It's interesting that the book of Malachi ends almost like a cliffhanger, with the sense that something grand was still about to happen. Did you enjoy learning more about the minor prophets? Then imagine having a visual, super organized summary of every book of the Bible, including the ones we've just explored. I've created amazing mind maps to help you better understand each book, review key points, and study the Bible in a much lighter and more effective way. If you want to go deeper in your biblical knowledge in a practical format, just click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen and get your complete material right now. And while you're at it, be sure to check out one of the videos showing up here on your screen. Stay in peace and see you next time.